There's been a mistake. That was the first thing Vanessa Whitmore said when I came home and discovered my house was gone. Not damaged. Not boarded up. Gone. I stood at the end of my driveway with one hand still wrapped around my truck keys, staring across a half-acre of churned red dirt where a two-story cedar house had stood 3 weeks earlier. The August heat pressed against my face, carrying the dry smell of crushed concrete, diesel fuel, and fresh-cut pine. Somewhere behind a blue construction dumpster, loose sheet metal clicked in the wind. Click, click, click. It was the only sound on the property because even the birds seemed to have cleared out. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 42 years old, and I restore old houses for a living. I know what demolition looks like. I know the difference between storm damage, structural collapse, and a machine deliberately reducing a building to a flat patch of earth. Whoever had done this had been thorough. My front porch was gone. My father's workshop was gone. The kitchen where he taught me how to make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in was gone. Even the stone chimney had been broken down and hauled away. All that remained were pale chunks of foundation, splintered lumber, and the parallel tracks of heavy equipment pressed deep into the soil. Then I noticed the sign. It was lying crooked beside what used to be my garage, white plastic streaked with mud, the Silver Pines Estates logo printed across the top in dark green letters. Unsafe structure removed by authority of the HOA. I read it twice. Then a white Lexus rolled slowly around the corner. Vanessa stepped out wearing cream slacks, sunglasses, and the calm expression of someone arriving 10 minutes early for a board meeting. She was 51, president of Silver Pines Estates, and for the last year, she had been trying to convince me that my property somehow belonged in her vision for the neighborhood. She stopped about 20 feet away. Her perfume reached me before her apology did. "Ethan," she said, lowering her sunglasses. "There's been a mistake with the parcel identification." I looked past her toward the empty rectangle where my house had stood. A mistake. The contractor received incorrect documentation. Her voice was smooth. "Practiced. Our attorneys are already reviewing it." I didn't raise my voice. I walked into the dirt and crouched beside one of the excavator tracks. The tread was almost 18 inches wide. Fresh. Clean-edged. Then I saw something half buried near the foundation, a bent brass hinge from my father's workshop door. I picked it up and rubbed the dust away with my thumb. Vanessa kept talking behind me about insurance, procedures, and administrative errors. I barely heard her, because underneath that workshop floor, my father had installed a fireproof steel box 30 years earlier. Inside it were documents Vanessa didn't know existed. And 3 months later, when a judge finally put a number on what Silver Pines had done, that number wasn't the cost of replacing my house. It was $22 million. I stood up, slipped the brass hinge into my pocket, and looked Vanessa straight in the eyes. "No, Vanessa. Mailing something to the wrong address is a mistake. You brought a bulldozer." 3 weeks earlier, that same patch of dirt had been the quietest place I knew. The house sat beneath 2 old oak trees at the end of a gravel drive, its cedar siding faded by decades of Texas sun, its porch boards polished smooth by boots, rain, and time. My father, Robert Cole, bought the place when I was 9 years old and spent nearly every weekend afterward fixing something. He believed old houses told you what they needed if you paid attention. A sticking door meant the frame had shifted. A stain on the ceiling meant water had already traveled farther than you thought. A hairline crack could be nothing, or it could be the first sentence in a very expensive story. He taught me to notice details before they became problems. That lesson eventually became my career. I started coal restoration with 1 pickup truck, a borrowed trailer, and enough tools to make my garage look like a hardware store had exploded inside it. 20 years later, I had 6 employees and more work than we could comfortably schedule. We restored farmhouses, historic storefronts, old barns, and the occasional Victorian that everyone else wanted to tear down. But my own house remained personal. I had replaced the roof with Dad. I had rebuilt the porch after a spring storm. The workshop behind the house still smelled faintly of pine sawdust and machine oil, even years after he died. Beneath its concrete floor sat the steel fireproof box he installed sometime in the 1990s. Dad never trusted filing cabinets with important papers. Deeds, surveys, tax records, permits, insurance documents. If paper could prove ownership, he kept it there. Silver Pines Estates arrived much later. What had once been pasture beyond my eastern property line became rows of stone front houses, decorative streetlights, matching mailboxes, and lawns green enough to look artificial in July. Then Vanessa Whitmore became Homeowners Association president. The first time she came to my porch, she carried a leather folder and an offer from a developer. They wanted my land for what she called a more cohesive entrance to the community. I read the number, closed the folder, and handed it back. Not interested. Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it changed. You should consider the future, Ethan. I am. She glanced past me at the cedar siding and the old workshop. Silver Pines is expanding. Properties like this can become difficult to maintain when development surrounds them. I leaned against the porch post Dad and I had installed together. Then I guess I will have to maintain it. 2 days later, the first letter arrived. Landscaping noncompliance. I was not a member of Silver Pines, so I mailed it back with a copy of my deed. Then came a complaint about my work trailer. Another about the workshop. Another claiming my gravel driveway created dust near community property. Every envelope carried the same dark green logo. Every response I sent carried the same sentence. My property is not subject to Silver Pines Estates. Vanessa stopped by once more the morning before I left for a restoration job outside San Antonio. I was loading tool cases into my truck when her Lexus slowed beside the driveway. She lowered the window and looked toward the house. Still refusing the offer? She asked. Still my house. For a second, she said nothing. The sprinkler system across the road hissed over freshly cut grass. Then she smiled. That house will not be here forever, Ethan. At the time, I thought she was talking about development. 3 weeks later, standing in the dust with my father's brass hinge in my pocket, I finally understood exactly what she meant. By the time I reached San Antonio, the first new notice was already waiting in my email. The subject line read property safety concern, followed by 3 photographs of my house taken from the road. One showed peeling paint on the workshop trim. Another showed a stack of cedar boards beneath a tarp. The third showed my work trailer parked beside the garage. Vanessa had labeled all 3 conditions evidence of abandonment. I read the message twice from my hotel room, while the air conditioner rattled against the wall and traffic hummed 8 floors below. Then I forwarded my property tax receipt, current insurance policy, and a photograph of myself standing on that same porch 4 days earlier. I reminded the board, again, that I was not a member of Silver Pines Estates. Their attorney responded the next afternoon. He claimed the Homeowners Association had received complaints about a hazardous structure near community boundaries and had referred the matter to local authorities. That phrase bothered me. Local authorities. It sounded official without identifying anyone. I called the county building office. A clerk named Daniel Price searched the address while I listened to keyboard clicks through the phone. I do not see an active demolition order on your residence, he said. Any open code violations? Nothing that would authorize demolition. I wrote his name, the date, and the exact time in my notebook. Dad taught me that too. When paperwork starts multiplying, keep better paperwork. Over the next 10 days, the pressure increased. A certified letter appeared at my temporary job site because someone had somehow obtained the address. It called my property a public nuisance. Another email claimed emergency landscaping access might be necessary. Then a Silver Pines board notice described my parcel as part of a proposed community improvement corridor. That was new. I opened the county property map on my laptop and zoomed in until the boundary lines filled the screen. My land sat like a rectangular notch against the western edge of Silver Pines. Their main entrance curved awkwardly around it before reaching the county road. If my property disappeared from that map, the neighborhood could have a straight entrance nearly 60 feet wide. Suddenly, Vanessa's purchase offer made more sense. I saved screenshots of everything. On the 17th day of my trip, my neighbor Linda Parker called. Linda lived across the county road in a brick ranch house she had owned since before Silver Pines existed. Her voice sounded uneasy. Ethan, there are people measuring around your place. I stepped away from the restoration crew and pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Surveyors? I do not think so. There is a white pickup and 2 men wearing contractor shirts. Vanessa is with them. Behind Linda's voice, I could hear the faint beep of equipment backing somewhere in the distance. Can you take pictures without going onto the property? I asked. Already doing it. 20 minutes later, 6 photographs arrived. Vanessa stood near my driveway holding a folder. Orange marking paint crossed the dirt near the workshop. A contractor was examining the house. And beside the oak tree at the eastern boundary, Someone had pushed a small orange flag into the ground less than 3 feet from the old survey marker Dad had shown me when I was a teenager. Their flag was on the wrong side. I called Vanessa immediately. She did not answer. I emailed the board, their attorney, and the county building office. I wrote that nobody had permission to enter, alter, remove, or demolish any structure on my property. I saved the sent message and the delivery confirmations. The next morning, Vanessa finally replied with 6 words. "Your concerns have been noted, Ethan." 2 days later, Linda sent me another photograph. This time there was a yellow excavator parked at the end of my driveway. The photograph arrived at 7:12 on a Thursday morning. I was standing inside a century-old house. Outside San Antonio, coffee in one hand, when my phone vibrated against a dusty windowsill. Linda had sent only 4 words. "Ethan, call me now." I opened the picture first. The yellow excavator sat beside my gravel driveway with its bucket lowered, morning sunlight flashing off the hydraulic arms. Behind it was a white dump truck. Orange cones had been placed across my entrance, and 3 men in reflective vests stood near the workshop. Vanessa was there too. Same white Lexus. Same leather folder. I called Linda. "They got here about 20 minutes ago," she whispered. "Vanessa is telling them where to put the equipment." I set my coffee down. "Is anyone touching the house?" "Not yet." I called the county building office. Daniel Price was unavailable. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and explained that contractors appeared to be preparing work on private property without my permission. Then I called the demolition company. The number was printed on the excavator door in Linda's photograph. A receptionist transferred me twice before a supervisor named Frank Delaney answered. "I own the property at 1426 Old Mill Road," I said. "Your equipment is sitting in my driveway, and nobody has authorization for me to be there." Paper shuffled on his end. "Sir, we have a demolition authorization." "For what address?" Silence. More paper. 1426 Old Mill Road. "Who signed it?" Another pause. "The work order came through Silver Pines Estates." My stomach tightened. Silver Pines does not own my property. I gave him my parcel number and told him to verify it with the county before touching anything. Frank promised he would contact the crew. At 8:06, Linda sent a second photograph. The excavator had moved closer to the house. At 8:19, she sent a video. The engine idled with a deep mechanical hum while Vanessa stood beside a man I assumed was the foreman. He held several sheets of paper and kept pointing toward the road. Linda was filming from her porch, almost 200 feet away, so most of their conversation disappeared beneath the diesel noise. Then the excavator shut off. For a few seconds, the morning became quiet. Enough for her phone to catch his voice. "Ma'am, this is not the address on my work order." Vanessa looked at the paper. She looked at my house. Then she stepped closer to him and said something Linda's microphone did not catch. The video ended 47 seconds later when Linda lowered her phone to answer another call. I watched it 3 times. The foreman had noticed the discrepancy before demolition started. Vanessa had been standing right there. At 8:31, I emailed everyone again. Silver Pines Board, their attorney, the demolition company, county offices. I attached my deed information and wrote one sentence in capital letters. "I do not consent to any demolition or alteration of my property." At 8:44, the demolition company's receptionist told me Frank was in a meeting. At 9:03, Vanessa finally answered her phone. "Stop the equipment," I said. Her voice was almost unnaturally calm. "Ethan, there are procedures underway that I cannot discuss with you directly. You are standing on property you do not own. Our counsel has reviewed the relevant documentation. Then send it to me." She exhaled softly. "You will receive everything through the proper channels." The call ended. I stared at my phone while the old house around me smelled of plaster dust and fresh lumber. At 9:17, Linda sent one final message. No photograph this time. No video. Just 7 words that made the room feel suddenly silent. "Ethan, the excavator just started moving again. I left San Antonio before lunch. The restoration crew could finish without me. I could not spend another night 200 miles away wondering what was happening on my own land." The drive north felt longer than it ever had. Highway tires hummed beneath me while my phone sat in the cup holder, lighting up with emails that somehow said everything except what I needed to know. Silver Pines Council acknowledged my objection. The demolition company said all questions had been referred to its insurer. The county confirmed that an inquiry had been opened. Nobody said the words I wanted to hear. Nobody said the work had stopped. By the time I reached Old Mill Road, the sun was low, enough to throw long shadows across the pavement. Linda was waiting beside her mailbox. She did not wave. She just looked toward my driveway. I followed her eyes and felt my hands tighten around the steering wheel. Orange construction fencing stretched across the entrance. Beyond it, my house had been reduced to piles of lumber, broken masonry, and scraped earth. The old oak trees were still standing, but everything between them looked wrong. Too open, too flat. The familiar outline I had seen thousands of times was simply missing. I parked on the shoulder and walked in slowly. Gravel crunched under my boots until it gave way to powdery dirt. The air smelled like diesel, dry wood, and pulverized concrete. Linda came up behind me carrying a large envelope. "I saved everything I could," she said. Inside were printed photographs, timestamps, and notes she had written while watching from across the road. 7:48, equipment arrived. 8:11, Vanessa spoke with foreman. 8:57, excavator moved toward residence. Linda had documented the entire morning like she knew someday somebody would try to rewrite it. "There is more video," she said. I stopped recording once, but I started again. I looked at her. "Did you hear what Vanessa told him?" Linda nodded slowly. "Some of it." Before she could explain, the white Lexus appeared. Vanessa parked near the construction fence and stepped out carrying a thick document packet. She walked toward me with the same controlled expression she wore at every board meeting. "Ethan, I am sorry you had to discover the situation this way." She handed me the packet. On top was a demolition authorization bearing my street address. Beneath it were nuisance notices, inspection photographs, and a parcel map highlighted in yellow. I studied the map. Something immediately felt wrong. The shape was close, but the eastern boundary ran several feet beyond the oak tree. Dad's survey marker should have been inside the line. On Vanessa's map, it was outside. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "It was provided through the appropriate process." "That is not what I asked." Her jaw tightened. "The association relied on professional documentation." I flipped to the last page. Near the bottom was a parcel identification number. I had seen my own number on tax bills for years. This one was different by 2 digits. I looked up at her. "This is not my parcel number." For the first time, her expression changed. Barely. A small pause. A blink that lasted half a second too long. Then the smile returned. "That is exactly why our attorneys are calling this an administrative error." I folded the packet closed. "You were warned this morning." I was told there was confusion. "The foreman told you the address did not match." She stared at me without answering. That silence told me more than another stack of paperwork could. I turned away and walked toward what remained of the workshop. Near the foundation, beneath a layer of dust and splintered cedar, something dark caught the fading sunlight. I crouched and brushed the dirt aside. Steel. One corner of my father's fireproof box was still buried under the concrete slab. The house was gone, but the records proving exactly where it had stood were still there. The next morning, I hired a recovery crew instead of a demolition crew. Nobody touched the foundation until I photographed the steel box from every angle and marked its location against the oak tree. The sun was barely above the roofs of silver pines when 2 workers lifted a fractured section of concrete and exposed the rest of it. Dad had anchored that box beneath the workshop floor with the same stubborn over-engineering he applied to everything. The lid was scratched, one corner was dented, but the lock still worked. I turned the key and smelled old paper, steel, and the faint cedar scent that had somehow survived inside. There were tax records, insurance policies, building permits, and a yellow envelope containing the original boundary survey from 1998. I unfolded it across the hood of my truck. Dad's handwritten notes ran along one edge. The eastern boundary passed exactly 4 feet, 7 inches west of the old oak tree. I walked over with a shovel and cleared the dirt around its roots. 3 inches down, my shovel tapped metal. Clink. The original survey pin was still there. I measured from it twice. Vanessa's highlighted map was wrong by more than 12 feet. That afternoon, I met Rachel Bennett, a property attorney recommended by one of my restoration clients. She had the kind of office where nothing seemed decorative except the view. No motivational plaques. No fake marble. Just shelves of case files and a conference table covered in documents within 20 minutes of my arrival. Rachel compared Dad's survey with the packet Vanessa had handed me. She stopped at the demolition authorization. Where did this copy come from? Vanessa. Rachel pulled up the county property database and typed in the parcel number. A different address appeared. 2318 Willow Creek Lane. It was less than a mile away, inside Silver Pines. The property had been vacant for nearly 2 years after a fire damaged an attached garage. More importantly, it had an actual demolition permit pending. Rachel leaned back. Your house was never the approved target. I felt that familiar metallic taste of adrenaline. Then how did my address get onto this paperwork? She placed the two records side by side. The county document listed Willow Creek Lane. Vanessa's packet listed Old Mill Road. Same contractor. Similar dates. Different property. Different owner. Different parcel. Someone had created a version that combined information from both. Rachel told me not to confront Vanessa again. We would preserve everything first. Emails. Photographs. Call logs. Delivery confirmations. Linda's videos. The original survey. Even the orange flag beside the oak tree. That evening, Linda came over with a flash drive. We sat at my temporary folding table under a work light because there was no house left to sit inside. Crickets chirped beyond the property line while traffic whispered along the county road. I found the rest, she said. The video from that morning. She opened the file on my laptop. The foreman stood beside Vanessa holding his work order. His voice came through more clearly than I remembered. Ma'am, this is not the address on my work order. Vanessa looked toward my house. Then she pointed toward the workshop. Her answer was partly covered by the excavator engine, but the final words were unmistakable. We have authorization. Proceed with the coal property. Rachel watched it twice without speaking. Then she asked Linda for the original phone file and its metadata. I looked across the dark lot toward the oak tree, where Dad's survey pin sat beneath the soil exactly where it had been for decades. Vanessa had called this confusion. The paperwork called it an error. But errors do not usually come with altered addresses, ignored warnings, and instructions given after someone points out the problem. For the first time since I came home, I stopped asking how they had demolished the wrong house. I started asking why they needed mine gone. Rachel filed the lawsuit 9 days later, but the real damage to Silver Pines began with a request for records. She wanted every email, text message, map, contractor invoice, board meeting note, and development proposal connected to my property. Vanessa's attorney called it excessive. Rachel called it discovery. I called it the first time anyone had forced them to stop talking and start producing evidence. For 6 weeks, boxes arrived at Rachel's office and digital files filled a secure drive. Most of it was boring. Landscaping budgets, meeting minutes, contractor bids. Then, late on a Tuesday afternoon, Rachel called me. Ethan, come downtown. I found her standing beside the conference table with 3 printed emails arranged in a row. The first was dated 4 months before my house disappeared. Vanessa had written to a developer named Northstar Residential about Silver Pine's proposed western entrance. Attached was a site plan. My property sat directly across the route in red shading. The second email came after I rejected their offer. Northstar's project manager wrote that without control of the coal parcel, the entrance design would require another traffic study, additional drainage work, and a costly redesign. Vanessa replied 17 minutes later. I am working on an alternative resolution. Rachel tapped the third page. It had been sent 11 days before I left for San Antonio. Vanessa wrote, once the obsolete structure issue is resolved, Mr. Cole, we'll have fewer reasons to resist a reasonable land transaction. I read that sentence until the words stopped looking like words. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. Obsolete structure, I said. My house. Rachel nodded. That is what we are going to establish. The records kept getting worse. Board minutes showed Vanessa had discussed community expansion without telling several board members that my property was outside the association. An internal map showed the correct boundary beside the oak tree. A contractor email warned that the demolition authorization referenced 2 different addresses. And buried inside a chain of forwarded messages was a scanned document showing exactly when my address appeared on paperwork originally connected to Willow Creek Lane. Rachel did not celebrate. She built a timeline. That was her strength. Every fact got a date. Every date got a document. Every document connected to the next one. The purchase offer. My refusal. The nuisance complaints. The development map. The altered demolition packet. My written warning. The foreman's warning. Vanessa's instruction to proceed. Then Linda's video. Silver Pines tried to settle quietly. Their first serious offer arrived in a thick envelope with confidentiality language attached. Rachel slid it across the table without recommending anything. I looked at the number and pushed it back. They still think this is about lumber and drywall. Rachel gave the smallest smile. Then we keep going. Depositions began the following month. Vanessa arrived wearing navy blue and carrying the same leather folder I remembered from my porch. Under oath, she said she had believed the demolition order was valid. She said she never intended to pressure me into selling. She said the development plan and demolition were unrelated. Rachel waited until Vanessa finished. Then she placed the email about the obsolete structure on the table. Vanessa's face went still. Next came the correct boundary map. Then the contractor warning. Then my email sent before the excavator moved. Each document closed another door. By the end of the afternoon, Vanessa was no longer explaining one administrative mistake. She was explaining a chain of decisions. Outside the courthouse, Rachel stopped beside me on the steps. "There is one thing we are not using yet," she said. I knew exactly what she meant. Linda's complete recording. The 47 seconds Vanessa thought had disappeared into diesel noise. Rachel looked back toward the courthouse doors. "Save the clearest evidence for the moment they leave us no other choice." Dad used to say the same thing about restoration. Never tear into a wall until you understand what is holding it up. We finally understood what was holding Vanessa's story together. Now we only had to remove one piece. The trial began on a cold Monday morning with the smell of coffee, polished wood, and old paper hanging inside the courtroom. Vanessa sat behind her attorneys in a charcoal suit, perfectly composed, while Rachel arranged 3 narrow binders in front of us. No mountain of exhibits. No theatrics. Just a timeline that Silver Pines had spent months trying to explain away. Their defense was simple. A contractor received conflicting documents. Vanessa believed the authorization was valid. My house was demolished because of an unfortunate administrative error. Their attorney repeated the word mistake so many times it began to sound rehearsed. Then Rachel stood. She started with the county record for 2318 Willow Creek Lane, the property that actually had a demolition permit. Next came my deed. Then Dad's 1998 survey. Then photographs of the survey pinned beside the oak tree. The boundaries matched across decades of records. My property had never belonged to Silver Pines. The room grew quieter when Rachel displayed the internal development map. My land was shaded red across the proposed western entrance. Then she showed Vanessa's email after I refused to sell. "Once the obsolete structure issue is resolved, Mr. Cole will have fewer reasons to resist a reasonable land transaction." Vanessa stared straight ahead. Rachel moved to the demolition paperwork. One document carried the Willow Creek parcel number. Another carried my street address. A contractor email had flagged the conflict before equipment arrived. Then Rachel showed my email from that morning, sent before the excavator moved, stating clearly that Silver Pines had no permission to touch my property. Their attorney argued that Vanessa had relied on professional advice. Rachel turned toward the judge. "Then I would like to show what happened when the professional on site warned her directly." Linda's original video appeared on the courtroom monitor. The picture shook slightly in the morning light. The excavator idled beside my driveway. Vanessa stood with the foreman. His voice came through the speakers. "Ma'am, this is not the address on my work order." Rachel paused the recording. Nobody moved. Then she played the rest. Vanessa looked at the paperwork, looked toward my house, and pointed toward the workshop. The engine noise swallowed part of her response, but not the words that mattered. "We have authorization. Proceed with the Cole property." The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument. Rachel did not raise her voice. She simply connected the final pieces: the purchase attempt, the development corridor, the nuisance campaign, the altered paperwork, the warnings, and the decision to continue anyway. By then, the word mistake had nowhere left to hide. When the judgment was finally read, I listened without moving. The award included the value of the destroyed property, restoration and related losses, additional damages tied to the conduct established at trial, and other amounts the court determined were supported by the case. The total was $22 million. I heard Rachel set her pen down beside the legal pad. A tiny click. That sound stayed with me more than the number. Vanessa turned toward her attorneys as if one of them might find another document capable of changing what everyone had just heard. There was not one. Outside, sunlight reflected off the courthouse windows and traffic rolled through downtown like any ordinary afternoon. Rachel stopped beside me at the top of the steps. 22 million, she said quietly. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the bent brass hinge I had carried since the day I came home. It was never about the number, I said, because money could replace lumber, stone, glass, and steel. It could not replace my father's hands on that porch or the years inside those walls. But the judgment did something Vanessa never expected. It put an official price on the difference between making a mistake and being warned repeatedly, then choosing to proceed anyway. 6 months later, the first thing I rebuilt was the workshop. I wanted one familiar place standing before the house returned. I used his original measurements wherever modern codes allowed it. Same footprint, same workbench location, same east-facing window. Above the new bench, I mounted the bent brass hinge I had pulled from the rubble. Vanessa resigned as Silver Pine's president after the judgment, and the proposed western entrance disappeared from the development maps. Northstar redesigned its project around my property, exactly as it could have done from the beginning. The original survey pin remained beneath the oak tree, and I had a licensed surveyor verify every boundary again. By spring, the frame of my new house stood where the old one had been. I could not rebuild every memory, so I stopped trying. Instead, I rebuilt what could still carry them forward. Dad used to tell me that when something looks wrong, measure twice before you cut. Vanessa never did. She saw my home as an obstacle, trusted paperwork she thought she controlled, and kept moving even after people warned her to stop. In the end, the strongest evidence was not dramatic. A survey pin, an email, a timestamp, a neighbor's video, a sentence spoken beside an idling excavator. That was enough. If you came home and found your house erased because an HOA decided your property stood in its way, what would you do first? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance meets evidence and every ignored warning comes back with a price, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most expensive mistake is the one somebody was warned not to make.